Yeah, I'll react to that, sure. Okay, guys, good morning. Let's go. Is this correctly adjusted? It's good enough. Hope you guys are doing well. Let's learn. Europe prior to World War I, alliances and enemy, prelude to World War I, part 1 of 3. Indian Idol, awesome. The Great War, great channel, preemptive like. Let's get started. Let's learn. If you are not ready to learn, sit in the back of the class.
And welcome to our new channel, The Great War. My name is Indy Nidell, and welcome to our new channel, The Great War. This show follows World War I from July 28, 1914 to November 11, 1918, week by week, exactly 100 years later. But in order for the initial weeks of the war to make more sense, we're doing these Prelude to War episodes to give you a little background. All here on our new channel, The Great War. Do you know what happened 100 years ago last month? On June 28, 1914, Archduke Franz Ferdinand was assassinated. This was the little match that ignited the bonfire of the First World War. Now, it took a full month after the assassination for war to be declared. And on July 28, 2014, it is exactly 100 years since the beginning of World War I, or the Great War as it was called, or even the war to end all war.
This is almost 10 years ago. Damn, time flies.
And unlike pretty much, or the Great War as it was called, or even the war to end all wars, and unlike pretty much every other World War I show ever, we're going to ignore Franz Ferdinand for the moment and talk about some other stuff. The consequences of the Great War were massive and affected pretty much every person in every country on Earth. 4 great empires ceased to exist. A bunch of new nations saw the light of day, and the explosive growth.
What are the 4? Austria-Hungary, Ottoman Empire, and Russian. What's the 4th? Oh, German Empire.
Of an extraordinary number of social movements, such as internationalism or fascism, changed the world's political...
I forget that it was the German Empire at the time. Am I thinking the right thing?
Of social movements, such as internationalism or fascism, changed the world's political landscape forever. Just in terms of technology, the Great War moved the world ahead by leaps and bounds. Cars and planes had existed prior to the war, but by 1918 we had tanks and diesel fuel, bombers and fighters, and large planes ready to be converted into the first airliners. And the tragedies were enormous. Although completely accurate records are impossible, the war caused close to 40 million casualties, killed or wounded, including nearly 10 million dead soldiers, in a world whose population was only a quarter of what it is now. But why the Great War? Why start it? Why go through with it? There had certainly been enough talk about a European war during the early parts of the 20th century. Sometimes romantically, such as when military leaders who'd never actually seen combat thought about coming home covered in glory. But most often, it was talked about as a necessity. And this was driven by waves of revolutionary sentiment, strikes and violent labor unrest, and above all, feverish nationalism, which together came to steer the course of Europe in the early 20th century. Now, we'll go into that in detail week by week. Think about a German Europe, not today, but 100 years ago. It's a theme that was certainly tossed around back then, most spectacularly in the bestseller Mitteleuropa. And I don't mean the Nazi kind of German Europe, but a true German-influenced and culturally and politically dominated Europe. You see, Prussia and then a unified Germany had emerged as the leading power in Europe after beating France under Bismarck in 1871, and things had just rolled on since then. By 1914, Berlin was the cultural capital of Europe, where you went if you wanted to study anything serious. Words like Hertz, Röntgen, Mach, and Diesel all come from this period. And British cabinet ministers, Russian Bolsheviks, they'd all studied in Germany, which had even replaced England as the industrial giant of Europe. Many people, not just German, dreamed of a German Europe, or at least a multinational German Commonwealth. Now, this Commonwealth could protect itself from England or the United States, could bring in raw materials from France and Scandinavia, would have its own coal and steel production, and hopefully even colonies in North Africa or in the Middle East where there was oil. It was an impressive dream, and it wasn't that far-fetched, especially when you think about what was going on outside of Europe at the time. See, Africa and India were basically being run from Europe. China was ready to collapse. The Ottoman Empire looked ready to collapse. What Germany really needed to do to succeed was to work with its German-speaking neighbor to the south. Germany had been allied with Austria since 1879. There was, though, a big problem with the Austro-Hungarian Empire because it was really shaky. Now, there's several reasons for this, but one big one that I'm going to mention right here: Austria had a serious mismanagement problem. Actually, when you look at the world around it, Austria was an anachronism. The rest of Europe was going through a huge age of nationalism, but in Austria, there were 15 different versions of the national anthem. Franz Joseph, the emperor, had been on the throne since 1848, and he was 84 years old, and he too was very out of place in modern Europe. And he made very questionable decisions. In 1908, for example, he made the decision to annex Bosnia and Herzegovina, which were nominally part of the Ottoman Empire. Now, this basically pissed everyone off, especially the Ottoman Empire. There were protests from all of the great empires.
So they're already not a very cohesive empire, and yet they want to continue going into the Balkans and getting more land.
Especially the Ottoman Empire. There were protests from all of the...
So, guys, it seems like a lot of the beginning parts of World War II, obviously, it was a Gavrilo Princip, him killing Archduke Franz Ferdinand. We all know that. But I see that as, that seems to be not so much significant. No, it was significant, but it wasn't so much that, like, that was, like, that just seemed to be, like, the straw that broke the camel's back, or maybe, like, the log that broke the camel's back. But it seems like a lot of the stuff that led to this is in Austria-Hungary trying to stay alive and assert its control over the Balkans in a time when... So, like, I only want to look at here because it seems like everyone else is just a response to this, with France and England kind of being the last two of being like, okay, fine, we'll go in. But a lot of what started the war is Austria-Hungary trying to stay alive and assert dominance in the area.
The great empires, but especially noisy protests from Bosnia's neighbor, Serbia. And I don't know if it's quite possible for me to express just how much anti-Austrian sentiment there was among the Slavic nations and the peoples of the Balkans. Now, looking back, you might have thought Vienna would have said, okay, you guys can have a sort of pan-Slavic nation under Vienna, which might have cooled things off a bit, but they didn't do that. What they did instead was nothing at all. You see, for years, Vienna had been trying to control its minority nations by basically paying them off, to the extent that they had no money left for things like the army. Austria spent less money on its army than England did, even though the Austrian army was 10 times the size. So they couldn't afford to keep trying to buy them off, which didn't work out anyway. So Vienna basically did nothing and hoped there would be no catastrophic events. That didn't work out so good. Now, does this sound really complicated? Well, it is. There hadn't been a real European war in over 40 years, war being kept at bay by a complicated and constantly shifting system of alliances. Now, you should look it up yourself because it's really interesting, but here's the basics. Germany and Austria-Hungary were 2/3 of the Triple Alliance, right? Italy being the third part at the time, but nobody really counted on them to help out in case of a war. Germany and France had historically been at odds with each other, but even more so after Prussia walked all over France in the Franco-Prussian War. France and England were allied, but it turned out that in the early 20th century, there were French contingency plans afoot to invade England, and vice versa, so go figure. When Bismarck had run Germany, he had cultivated Russian friendship, but that was long gone. Much of the German elite now openly looked down on Russia, who allied herself with France when German industrial and military power really got going, and the Triple Entente between England, France, and Russia became official in 1907. The German Empire was friendly with the Ottoman Empire, and a true Russian nightmare would be the Germans in charge of the Dardanelles, through which Russia sent up to 90% of her wheat exports. Russia supported Serbia and all of the Slavic peoples, which meant they were banging heads with both Austria-Hungary and the Ottoman Empire, through which Russia sent up to 90% of her wheat exports. Russia supported Serbia and all of the Slavic peoples, which meant they were banging heads with both Austria-Hungary and the Ottoman Empire, and everybody was worried about another Balkan explosion. That's almost it, but not quite. Before I go, I'd like
No, that I think I understood that quite well there. Okay, yeah, all right.
to mention the unique case of Germany and Great Britain. Now, the Germans and the English admired each other culturally, industrially, and militarily. Germany especially admired England's vast overseas empire and her navy, the greatest the world had ever seen. And many Germans were convinced that the British Navy was the key to her success, her power, and her empire. Now, I'm going to quote historian Norman Stone. The last thing Germany needed was a problem with Great Britain, and the greatest mistake of the 20th century was made when Germany built a navy designed to attack her. Pretty heavy words, but think about it. The Kaiser, who occasionally ruled Germany by decree, totally ignoring the fact that the German people did not want war with anybody and admired and respected the British, built a navy. A navy built for only one purpose, to challenge Britain. Ignoring the fact that the German people did not want war with anybody and admired the decree. Totally heavy words, but think about it. The Kaiser, who occasionally ruled Germany by decree, totally ignoring the fact that the German people did not want war with anybody and admired and respected the British, built a navy. A navy built for only one purpose, to challenge Britain. Winston Churchill, at the time Britain's First Lord of the Admiralty, suggested a mutual pause in naval building, reasoning that for the British Empire, a powerful navy was a necessity, but for the German Empire, a luxury. But Kaiser Wilhelm would not have it, and he built up the German Navy. That navy took a third of the German defense budget, which meant that Germany could not afford a two-front war against France and Russia if such a thing were to happen. And it also meant that there were a bunch of giant battleships sitting in harbors thumbing their noses at England. Now, there was substantial naval warfare, especially submarine warfare, between England and Germany during the war. But these battleships didn't do anything. They just sat there taking up space the entire war until their crews finally mutinied.
It seems like you're trying to build up a navy, which it will, even if you put like all of your effort into it, will not stand a chance against the UK, the British Navy. And you're just doing it at the cost of weakening your important part of your army, or of your military, being your land army. So
had much more armor.
It just seems like you're weakening yourself all around for no reason.
Than British ships faced the entire war until their crews finally mutinied. They had much more armor than British ships, and they were really impressive, but they just sat there mocking England, whose response was to outbuild the German Navy 2-1 and make further defensive arrangements with France and Russia. That was interesting, right? Okay, I'm going to wrap it up here, but come back next time to see what was going on in Serbia, Italy, and other sunny places with long cultural histories.
Although I know that they did want to have overseas territory, overseas colonies, and so you're going to have to build a navy, if not for war with England, but just to secure your colonies and trade routes around the world. So maybe that was an intention.
Don't forget to subscribe to get each new episode. And also, this show is available in German and Polish. So if you or your friends want to watch it, but English isn't your first language, links to those channels are below.
Let's just go right into it, guys.
My name is Indy Nidell, and this channel, The Great War, follows World War I week by week, exactly 100 years later. But before we can do that properly, we thought we'd give you a little background on Europe in 1914. Okay, the immediate cause of World War I was the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, which we'll cover in a separate special episode. Today, I'm going to talk a little bit about the cultural hatred and nationalistic fever that led up to his assassination. This was something that was happening all over Europe. Heck, it was happening all over the world, but especially in the Balkans. So let's take a look at the Empire of Austria-Hungary and the Balkan nations. Now this empire, even as it still grew, was slowly being torn apart by the tensions of its multi-ethnic states, in particular the Slavic ones. Now in 1908, Emperor Franz Joseph had formally annexed Bosnia and Herzegovina. Now this annexation inflamed anti-Austrian hatred throughout the Balkans, but especially in Serbia, who were denied the chance of an Adriatic port by Austrian expansion into 375 miles of predominantly Slavic territory.
So guys, I would love to learn more about the Ottoman side of the story of like late 1800s or pre-World War I, 1900s, and just about the Slavic nations themselves and what was going on within them in the decades prior to this. I really would
This
like to.
also gave Austria a base that she could use for any military adventures against Serbia. Now, what you have to realize is that the Slavs were split up between Austria, Serbia, Montenegro, and Bulgaria, and most of them dreamed of a pan-Slavic nation. These nations, though, except for Austria, had been not only part of the Ottoman Empire for centuries, but often violently oppressed parts of the Ottoman Empire, and only recently were they finally able to determine their own fates. So seeing Austria suddenly gobble up new territory with a sizable Slavic population, well, not good. If you look at Serbia in the first decade of the 20th century, here's what you find. First and foremost, a young and proud nation. Serbia had only gained its independence from the Ottoman Empire in 1878, and it was intensely nationalistic. The rest of Europe looked at Serbia suspiciously, though, and its catchphrase, "Where dwells a Serb, there is Serbia." Well, you can see how that didn't sit well with a lot of people. And let's face it, the only way for Serbia to have...
Basically, if you have one Serbian, they're basically saying, like, no, that's not your land. That's part of Serbia, even if it's in... Yeah,
United
okay.
the Southern sit well with a lot of people, and let's face it, the only way for Serbia to have united the Southern Slav peoples would have been to bring down Austria-Hungary for good, which would have taken a war, which is kind of what happened. Fewer than 5 million people lived in Serbia, though, so all intentions aside, that wasn't going to happen by itself. However, in the search for allies, Serbia alienated a lot of Europe by the brutal and often violent repression of its own minority peoples, especially Muslims. In much the same way, Serbs and other minorities were repressed by Austria-Hungary, so they didn't get a whole lot of sympathy. And also, endless Balkan violence was nothing new to people. In fact, it was just one of those things that most Europeans were resigned to reading about in the
The Balkans and this time seem like they feel like the Middle East today. It's just a bunch of
papers
people,
from time to time. Another
a bunch of different, very complicated, but I definitely like to learn
that
more about it.
most Europeans were resigned to reading about in the papers from time to time. Another
I don't know if that was a great comparison.
murder, another bombing in that far-off corner of Europe where such things just seemed to happen, and regime change was often by murder. Actually, stereotypes aside, the last did happen in 1903. King Alexander and Queen Draga were murdered in their private apartments by a group of young army officers, and their bodies were mutilated. Now, one of the men responsible, Dragutin Dimitrovic, became a national hero when he was wounded by royal guards. He was also known simply as Alpis, and had been a founding member and leader of the Black Hand, who organized the hit on the king and queen. The Black Hand. You just sort of know from the name that these guys aren't going to be devoted to, you know, starting soup kitchens or maintaining city parks. Anyhow, by the beginning of the First World War, there were thousands of members of the Black Hand, many of them Serbian army officers and even government officials. And this secret organization did pretty much what you would expect of a terrorist organization: plan political murders, train and equip guerrillas, and so forth. And they, and Serbian nationalist goals in general, got a big boost in 1912 and 1913 from the two Balkan Wars, which I'm going to tell you about right now. Okay, not right now, because to talk about the Balkan Wars, I first have to talk about the Moroccan crises. Now, there were two of these, one in 1905 and one in 1911, and you can look them up for details. But what they very basically and very generally involved was the Kaiser trying to drive a wedge between England and France, and hopefully even form an alliance between Germany and England. But they succeeded in doing the opposite, and made the alliance between France and
Just fast forward.
Now, because to talk about the Balkan Wars, I first have to talk about the Moroccan crises. Now, there were two of these, one in 1905 and one in 1911, and you can look them up for details. But what they very basically and very generally involved was the Kaiser trying to drive a wedge between England and France, and hopefully even form an alliance between Germany and England. But they succeeded in doing the opposite, and made the alliance between France and Britain stronger than ever, and drove a deeper wedge between them and Germany. Another result was that France took control of Morocco. Now, at the time, Britain had Egypt, right? So what happens next is very important. Italy saw Ottoman land being seemingly handed out and thought, I gotta get me some of that. So Italy went to war. Now, because of all the Moroccan foolishness, Italy figured, correctly, that England, France, and Germany would do nothing to stop her. So she attacked the Ottoman Empire. The war lasted less than a month, and Italy successfully took Libya. And the dominoes start to fall. The Balkan states, see,
It's like blood. It's like one shark took a bite out of a big fish, and now all the sharks are going.
How easily
And the Ottoman Empire is that fish, seemingly.
and the dominoes start to fall. The Balkan states, seeing how easily the weakest of the powers could beat the Ottoman Empire, got together and attacked in the First Balkan War. Serbia, Montenegro, Greece, and Bulgaria, with Russian influence, formed the Balkan League, and together succeeded in driving the Ottomans out of the Balkans entirely for the first time in 500 years. It was a big loss for the Ottomans. However, 1 month after the war, Bulgaria, unsatisfied with the way the conquered territories were split up, turned around and attacked Serbia and Greece.
Oh my God. So, okay. I think that maybe France and the United Kingdom should have done something to keep Italy from attacking Libya. Hindsight, obviously, but I mean, if they probably should have known if Italy could easily beat them, then other people in the Balkans would just start to attack the Ottomans.
Note here,
or Ottoman
Serbia
territory.
occupied Albania in the Second Balkan War and finally had a seaport of her own. But Austria issued an ultimatum to remove all Serbian forces from Albania within 8 days. Serbia complied. Now, as you may guess, this was all a complete mess, and here are some important results. Serbia pretty much doubled her territory in the Balkan Wars, even without Albania, and if you asked a Serb in early 1914, they'd probably say that wars seem to work out pretty well for them, but they pay a terrible price in the end. Between 1912 and 1918, 1 out of every 6 Serbs, men, women, and children, would die violently. After the collapse of the Balkan League and Russia's clearly pro-Serbian position in the Second War, Russia was left with only Serbia as an ally in the entire area. And Russia really wouldn't have much choice but to unconditionally support Serbia in 1914. Both Austria-Hungary and Germany were worried by Serbia's growth in both size and stature. And since a lot of German-speaking people saw Serbia as a Russian satellite, well, Austria was ready and willing to put its foot down on Serbian growth and Slavic nationalism. At the same time, after losing a war to Japan in 1905 and being unable to prevent the Bosnian annexation in 1908, the Tsar in Russia was willing and ready to put his foot down to prevent any further loss of face for Russia. And that's where we were in June 1914. All of these sides playing off one against the other, and at the epicenter of it all, in the Balkans, an organization that used terrorism and political murder to try and achieve its goals. And then Franz Ferdinand.
This is one of the reasons why I don't know how to say it, but how it seems like the Gavrilo Prince, the murder of Archduke Franz Ferdinand is given more significance overall than maybe it's due. The reason I'm saying, obviously it was the catalyst to, it was the spark, right? That blew everything up. I get it. But are we really going to act like if he didn't kill him, then stuff would have been perfectly fine? It seems like something was about to happen, and the animosity towards between Serbia and the Austrians would have probably boiled over. I'd like to hear your guys' opinion on that. Or maybe if a big official wasn't killed, then it wouldn't have... Actually, maybe not. If there wasn't an assassination of any major official or member of either country, empire, would it have happened eventually?
Went to Sarajevo.
I don't know.
If you missed our Prelude to War special #1, you can click here and watch it right now. You can also check out our other social media platforms like Facebook or Twitter.
3-3.
As any schoolboy or schoolgirl knows, the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand
I gotta
in
peek with guys. Be
Sarajevo,
right back. Okay, sorry.
June 20th. As any schoolboy or schoolgirl knows, the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand in Sarajevo, June 28, 1914, was the match that touched off the conflagration of World War I. My name is Indy Nidell, and this channel, The Great War, follows World War I week by week, exactly 100 years later.
Well,
first,
110 years later now.
I'd like to talk a little about Franz Ferdinand himself, so here's a very brief bio. He was born in 1863, one of Austria's 70 archdukes. It wasn't called Austria-Hungary yet. Now, he became very wealthy just before he reached his teens, when his cousin died and he was chosen to inherit a vast estate. Another death in 1889 changed his destiny enormously, the suicide of his cousin, Crown Prince Rudolph. This left Ferdinand's father heir to the throne of Austria-Hungary, but he immediately renounced his position, leaving Franz Ferdinand next in line to rule the empire. He was still in this position when he died, by which time Emperor Franz Joseph was 84 years old and Ferdinand was 50. Now, if you read pretty much any bio, long or short, on Franz Ferdinand, you'll discover that not a whole lot of people actually liked him. Well, except his wife, the Duchess Sophia. She was a Bohemian aristocrat, but without actual royal blood, so the imperial house made certain that neither Sophia nor any of her children could ever inherit the throne. This also meant they weren't much accepted by the Austrian aristocracy, in spite of his position as the next emperor, and a lot of people went out of their way to treat the Archduke and Duchess like crap. One other thing that every bio is sure to mention is Ferdinand's passion for hunting. He apparently recorded over 250,000 creatures killed in his 50 years on Earth. Now, I suppose that's really neither here nor there, but what is here and there are Franz Ferdinand's beliefs. He was very conservative and, let's just call it, unenlightened, to be polite.
Wilhelm?
He hated the Hungarians. He thought the Slavs were less than human, and he actually referred to Serbs as pigs. He was also very strongly Catholic, which carried with it the anti-Jewish, anti-Jesuit baggage of the times. He did love his wife, though, with a great passion, and the preservation of the Austrian Empire, and that is something we'll come back to in a few minutes. Before that, let's meet his assassin, Gavrilo Princip. Princip was a member of the Young Bosnians, one of several violent secret societies in the Balkans, and one who decided to kill Franz Ferdinand when he...
The Young Bosnians, like the Young Turks, who were like essentially like the were they nationalists in Turkey? Young Bosnians, Young Turks. What's with the young word?
Announced his societies in the Balkans,
Young
and
title.
one who decided to kill Franz Ferdinand when he announced his June visit to Bosnia in March 1914. Okay, so in May, Princip and two associates went to Belgrade, Serbia, where they were provided with 4 pistols and 6 bombs by the Black Hand, and Princip had some shooting practice in a city park. Now, that's not especially relevant. I just thought I'd like to point out that people had shooting practice in city parks back then. So, at the end of May, Princip and company took an 8-day journey to Sarajevo, planning to kill the Archduke. It's important to note here that the Austrian authorities and the Archduke himself were aware of the danger of some sort of murder attempt, since these sort of things were pretty commonplace in the empire, and especially in the Balkans. Now, here's a quote from Franz Ferdinand the day he began his journey to Sarajevo and his car overheated. "Our journey starts with an extremely promising omen. Here our car burns, and down there they will throw bombs at us." So, the evening before they were supposed to arrive in Sarajevo, right? Franz Ferdinand and Sophia surprised everyone by turning up early, just on impulse. And they had a really nice time wandering around the town, which was a pretty exotic place back then. And later that evening came one of the great foreshadowing moments of all time. A member of the Bosnian parliament who had urged Ferdinand and Sophia to cancel the whole trip for reasons of safety was presented to Sophia, and she said this: "Things do not always turn out the way you say they will. Wherever we have been, everyone, down to the last Serb, has greeted us with such great friendliness, politeness, and true warmth that we are very happy with our visit." Okay, so far so good. But then the guy, whose name was Sunarik, answered this: "Your Highness, I pray to God that when I have the honor of meeting you again tomorrow night, you can repeat those words." Then they had a big banquet that night, and late the next morning, coincidentally their 14th wedding anniversary, the Archducal motorcade left Sarajevo station. No fewer than 7 young Bosnian
It hasn't happened before, therefore it won't happen in the future.
Archducal motorcade left Sarajevo station. No fewer than 7 young Bosnian hitmen were deployed on the town's bridges, one of which
I had to sneeze, sorry.
Fewer than 7 young Bosnian hitmen were deployed on the town's bridges, one of which the Archduke had to cross. Now, one of the young Bosnians threw a bomb at the Archduke's car, but it bounced off his hood before it exploded, wounding 2 of the Archduke's men. The motorcade drove on to the town hall, and they listened to a bunch of the usual speeches. And then, after that, Franz Ferdinand changed.
Yeah. What? It's that casual? Oh, yeah, someone threw a bomb at us. It bounced off, though, and hurt some of my men. Just, all right, carry on.
His plans. He decided to visit the men who'd been hurt by the bomb to see if they were okay. So he wanted to go toward the hospital. But there was a lot of confusion over the new route and who'd been told what and who hadn't been told what. So when the Archduke's driver turned off the Apple key, the general sharing Ferdinand's car told the driver, no, back up and continue.
Hold on, guys. Hold on. So, a lot of what could have just been a more Serbian-Austrian conflict changes a lot because, like he said earlier in the previous video, or the one before that, where Russia didn't really have any allies left except Serbia and would have to join in. And that's, I'm sure, when it changes from a Balkan conflict with the Austrians and Serbs fighting to Russia goes in, Germany goes in, French and British come in, and then it's a world war.
On Apple key. So the driver stopped the car.
Sorry, a good question would be, do you think it would have became a world war if Russia didn't come to Serbia's defense? Not saying it should have or shouldn't have.
It had no functioning reverse gear, and he stopped it right next to where
I got
the driver, no, back up and continue on Apple key. So the driver stopped the car because it had no functioning reverse gear, and he stopped it right next to where Gavrilo Princip was standing. So Princip raised his pistol and fired twice from a distance of only a few feet away. Sophie died instantly, and Franz Ferdinand's last words were, Sophie, don't die. Stay alive for our children. Franz Ferdinand died shortly after. Now, it's pretty amazing when you think about it that this whole enterprise could have possibly succeeded. I mean, it was so incredibly amateurish, and had the Austrian authorities taken any precautions whatsoever, well, I mean, think about it. There are loads of people who think the Black Hand had more to do with it, but you'd think they'd plan a little better, or heck, plan at all. Anyhow, here were the immediate results. Word of the assassination spread instantly throughout Europe, and in Bosnia, by the end of July, more than 5,000 Serbs had been jailed, many of whom were later hanged when the war broke out. Princip was put in prison, being 27 days too young to receive the death penalty under Austrian law. Now, there were one or two European leaders who were seriously worried about the political consequences of the act, but most of Europe reacted by thinking it was more of the same. The usual Balkan business, another Balkan killing. There was very little mourning, even in Vienna, for the unloved Franz Ferdinand, and his funeral service only lasted 15 minutes. But there was one thing that became apparent only years later. You see, Princip, or the Serbs, or the Black Hand, or whoever you like to say was behind the killing, really got the wrong guy. Franz Ferdinand, for all his talk about Serbs being pigs or Russian autocracy being a good model for the future, for all his backward and outdated beliefs, had strong opinions on two very important things. One, in contrast to most of the empire, he was absolutely against any war with Russia and stated repeatedly that he would do anything in his power to prevent it. And two, since he put the empire above his personal beliefs, and to make the empire work once again, he was sympathetic to the idea of making the bipartite state of Austria-Hungary into a tripartite state of Austria, Hungary, and a union of the Slavic peoples as the third part of the empire. So when a Serb killed Franz Ferdinand, it was a killing that was not only against Serbian interests, but since the Austrian Empire used the killing as a justification to invade Serbia, even if it meant war with Russia, Princip killed the one and only person in the empire who was determined and able to prevent that war, Franz Ferdinand. This was episode number 3 of our Great War Prelude to War specials. Now, if you missed the first 2 episodes, you can click here to watch both episode 1
This is a good video,
and episode
too.
2.
I reacted to this. Very interesting, guys. It seems to me the weirdest, craziest part is clearly all of the danger that's going on and people just carrying on and the bomb being thrown at the car and then him just being... It was clearly just any other day, right? It was just any other day in the Balkans. And the brashness of just like not caring about... It seems like this would have happened eventually. They were so comfortable. You could even hear, was it Sophia saying that, you know, we've only had good like interactions with people in the Balkans and wherever they went. And if this didn't succeed, you can tell by him wanting to go see the people who were affected by the bomb and then kept going, that this wouldn't have stopped. That, like, they were so nonchalant about going into this area that if it wasn't the only place that I've always kind of been of the belief that World War I would have happened no matter what. But the more I think about it, the more I realize how unnuanced that was. And, you know, a lot of people didn't want war, but I talk about the Germany wanting to be on the same level of France and Britain. And when the war broke out in the Balkans and the Russians, it was probably a really good opportunity to show your might or whatever. But maybe if an official wasn't assassinated, I mean, there were assassinations all the time. I don't know. The more I've gotten to a point where I've learned enough to realize that I'm not confident anymore as to what would have happened had Archduke Franz Ferdinand never been assassinated. Would there have been a more localized war? Would it have just been, you know, a few months or a year or two later where it really would have started? I don't know. I need to learn more about that. What I really would like to learn, something I saw in this, I realized during watching these videos, is what was going on in the Balkans from the 1870s, maybe even a little earlier, to 1914. And what was going on with the Ottomans. Clearly, the Ottoman Empire was not doing well and was pretty weak. But I would just love to... Honestly, I would love to... You know what? I would love to learn about, even centuries earlier, about the Balkans under the Ottomans, when the Ottomans were more strong and sturdy of an empire. Love y'all. Hope you're all doing well. Would appreciate any answers to any of my questions I had, any of the questions I had, or any comments at all. Love it when you do it. I really appreciate it. Would love if you liked and subscribed, and hopefully I'll see you next video, and we'll learn some more. Bye, guys.